So when we say do not turn it on, that's why we're saying that, right? Because it's not even 10% of the iceberg that's above the water. It's 1% that's above the water, and you've got 99% that you have no idea that's underneath the water.
Welcome to This Is Fine, a podcast by Hunter Strategy where we dig into the world of cyberspace, technology, and public policy with a touch of humor and a dash of irreverence. I'm your host, Matt Triner, CEO of Hunter Strategy, and today we're going to navigate the treacherous waters of the most recent Windows 11 recall feature and its implication for privacy and breaches in our digital landscape. Today, joining me are our esteemed guests. First up, we have Jennifer Lee, partner at Constangy, Brooks, Smith, and Prophete LLP, who specialize in the legal intricacies of cyber litigation, data security, incident response management, and regulatory investigations. Next, we have Jake Williams, the VP of R&D here at Hunter Strategy, who is constantly innovating our corporate capabilities in the realm of cybersecurity products and services. And last but not least, we have AJ King, our very own Chief Information Security Officer, with expertise in cybersecurity consulting, security architecture, and third-party vendor risk management. Today, we'll cut through the tech jargon and legal jumble to understand the nitty-gritty on the Windows 11 recall and its wide-reaching effects on privacy and security. So grab your favorite beverage, sit back, and let's navigate this digital minefield together. So to start off, just for people that haven't heard about it, because they recalled recall, what is Windows Recall as a feature, and why did it create some alarms among the security community basically within seconds of it being announced? Jake, do you want to take that?
Oh, yeah. So Recall is this fantastic feature that literally nobody asked for, where you can effectively get a screenshot taken of all of your work every, I believe it was every 5 seconds while the machine was live and the background wasn't changing. Then it would use a local image to text, try and index that information so you could quickly go back and find that thing you were working on. In doing some tests with this early in Azure, wow, I was blown away because it was capturing things in text like, you could go back and search for SSH private key. Turns out, sure, Recall's like, yes. And so anyway, more about that in a little bit, but that's the high level on what Recall is. It's the dumpster fire that every corporate lawyer was absolutely asking.
Starts out with really cool feature, ends with dumpster fire. Love it.
Well, I was going to say, so you can see the logical leap that some product manager took between that feeling that everybody's had with, oh, shoot, where did I do this? And searching through your email and searching through your chat histories. And
look, it's Microsoft. Microsoft Search sucks as a concept. So I get where they took the leap, to be totally honest with you.
Well, that's exactly right. Well, and even, by the way, in Google accounts, Google search was like the reason you bought Google, and I can't get a search in Gmail to find anything I'm ever looking for anymore. So search has gotten really hard, and I'm beating my head against the wall thinking like, what was the exact word? What is the exact phrase I used? Which is also like kind of regressive. That feels like Yahoo category links days from like early 90s internet when like if you didn't know the word, yeah, it was all keywords and like traversal. And so, but to kind of jump from, I think we all know that everyone here clearly knows that problem. And Jennifer, probably receiving more dense documents as the attorney in the group, probably has even harder indexing searching than the rest of us do. This is pure conjecture, but do we think it was like, we have a problem with search, let's solve it with AI? Like, what logical jump do you think came from, we have this problem, everybody knows the problem, and let's solve it using one of the most invasive anti-privacy mechanisms I've ever seen in a feature built in an operating system?
Look, I feel like a lot of people would agree that Outlook search was in need of a revamp, right? Maybe I'm just cynical, but in terms of where we were with AI and just everyone's, I guess, eagerness to jump on that bandwagon, maybe they were trying to use this as a solution to fix their problems with Outlook search.
To fix the marketing problem that we don't have enough AI, or to fix the marketing search problem, or both?
No, to fix the problem that is Outlook search as a concept with this AI concept.
So we got there because we know there's a problem and we ran to the existence. I'm going to start with you, Jennifer. Go ahead, Jake, please.
I want to clarify the real reason that recall is a thing. There's a new technology available, right? These not just large language models, right, but also Qualcomm saying, "Hey, we're going to produce these nice little laptops. They're going to have a neural processing unit on board, computing power from a like GPU type you couldn't have bought a few years ago." And they said, "Hey, brand new capability. And the way you get promoted to VP at Microsoft is product launch." So whether the product makes sense or not, you're in Google, you're in Microsoft, it's successful product launch that gets you promoted. Doesn't matter, actually, maybe not even successful, but doesn't matter whether or not it takes off long term.
Oh, I totally agree. I'm also cynical in that way, but my personal issue was with Outlook search.
No, I mean, real problem. I think to Jake's point, real technology solution looking for a problem and kind of an arranged marriage, so to speak, that occurred, which may sometimes work out. I'm not judging arranged marriages conceptually, but I feel like their success rate with regular marriage are relatively similar, but it was a forced situation. It wasn't a naturally occurring, this problem finding a solution. It's we've got R&D and Qualcomm saying we've got a great solution to fast processing, and you've got Jennifer and myself sitting searching through Outlook tirelessly to find that one email that you absolutely know exists, but Outlook search keeps telling you no, it doesn't.
Solution was a product manager with a rock, kind of like in the Croods, hitting his head, going, "I have an idea," right? And yeah, that was the solution.
So we've talked about how we got here, at least, but I'm curious, and I'll start with Jennifer on this, is what are the legal implications to having this type of storage, and forgetting this, like we'll talk about the security implications of it as kind of a parallel path, but of having this data sitting on your laptop. In your opinion, what are the legal implications of that feature being enabled at an enterprise level, right? So a whole company decides we're going to turn this on for our staff.
Right. And depending on where the company is based, depending on where it has its offices, if that feature is turned on enterprise wide, now it's faced with different having to issue and get consent to have this enabled because of not only California, but at this juncture, we have different state statutes across the country, not to mention, obviously, like Europe and GDPR. And there are a couple of jurisdictions in which this would absolutely require positive consent, opt-in consent versus opt-out consent, especially, again, with jurisdictions in the EU, like Germany. So you're now opening a whole can of worms for your legal department here to make sure that your privacy policies within just employees, at least, are in line with what is happening. And then obviously there are secondary aspects to consider regarding if these are being taken on a periodic interval without any regard to what is being taken screenshots of. You may be looking at emails, and that may run into other statutes regarding stored communications.
So we've talked a little bit about the legal implications, and I know it's a broad question and it depends is certainly going to be the answer. What legal jurisdiction are you in? What country are you in? Obviously. And let's talk a little bit about the security implications of what does it mean to have that level of history stored on your local machine? And let's look a little bit at the implementation, because I think that that's a non-trivial aspect of the security implementation, because from my understanding of what I read, and I didn't go and decompile it or mess with it or anything personally, so I'll fully admit I'm going on hearsay here and ask the team to kind of to set me straight. But my understanding is it was stored in a local, effectively SQLite database that had no form of encryption and no form of authorization.
And within like a week also had a fully remote Linux tool built to pull from any machine. Like it was almost built with like
Well, so to be fair, once you were authenticated over the network using the user's credentials, but Microsoft really banked a bunch, and their whole PR message was, don't worry, it's only your account that has access to this. I'm like, and everything running under your account, right? Every info stealer running under your account.
What are the security implications of having that data available and implemented in that way? And I have a follow-up. They naturally fit together, which is to say, is there a safe way to build this, or just a safer way to build this, and it's fundamentally not a safe thing to have as a technology?
My opinion is there's a safer way to build this, but there's not a safe way to build this. Because to your point, like anything that is recording clear text information on your screen is going to be a security issue, right? And privacy issue, right? I mean, Jennifer, like she talked about some of the privacy issues, but I mean, even if you're outside of the United States or outside of Canada, and Jake, I was thinking about this just recently after my Copilot talk. Can you imagine Copilot plus Recall if those actually somehow got merged together to the ability to, at scale, be able to query everything inside of an environment? Like, I can't even imagine the implications that are there.
Yes, that was the obvious product
Yes,
roadmap.
exactly. And so, like, we did all these talks on Recall and the issues that are with Recall, right? With the ability from an attacker perspective to land on a single endpoint, right? And then anything that is over provisioned to that particular user, you now have clear text access to. So from my perspective, there's a safer way to do it, but I don't think that I would recommend ever to build this. It's like to Jake's point, it's a product looking for a problem. Like nobody asked for it.
Well, and I think you meant the talks we were giving
Yes,
on
sorry,
Copilot.
correct.
So yeah, and that's an interesting kind of, because it's the similar LLM that's backing these capabilities, right? It's just Microsoft kind of unleashing how far they are in the middle of our lives day to day and kind of bringing those LLMs closer to what we do. I think there's an interesting parallel with Copilot and with Recall, in that they're, to be fair, some people are really excited about Copilot. They want this search capability. The functionality that it means to them means a lot. But a lot of those people aren't thinking about the fact that there's a good chance that their file structures and permissions are not as clean as they think that they are, and with that creates a lot of risk. It's kind of an interesting thing. I almost think like, well, Copilot's the best permissions auditing tool I've ever seen, if only that were to be its sole purpose and not to actually pull the contents of everything together for easy access. So my question is if there isn't really a safe way to do this, is this just something that we need to accept, that companies and this need for feature launches and new product launches as a function of what's cool in the market? AI is the thing, right? That's not even like a disputed question from anyone on this call, from what's the cool thing that every investor and Wall Street wants to see in your product line. It's AI. So is this just an inevitable thing that the security community needs to keep an eye on? Or is this kind of early follies in a misunderstood technology?
Well, real quick, before we go there, let me back up and note that, Microsoft did pull Recall.
Recall.
They recalled Recall and announced changes. Before they recalled it, they announced that as Recall went live, that they would have some additional protections in place. One of them being that they were encrypting the database locally, and that the database would be encrypted with a key stored on the TPM. Again, unless you've got NSA level awesomeness, right, and physical access to the device, you're not extracting that key from the TPM. And that would only be decrypted when the user, not when the user was logged in, but when the user was actively accessing Copilot. And for them to do that, that's going to pop the prompt that gets you to challenge Windows Hello or a password or something. And so that's no question a step in the right direction from a normal, consumer privacy angle. And so Microsoft's already taking, or has announced that they're taking steps to make this more secure. But kind of to AJ's point, right? More secure doesn't mean secure, and more safe doesn't mean safe. I'm staring at the wall in front of me here. I have 2 reserve parachute handles hanging on the wall from things that were made safer, but let's agree, not necessarily safe.
And in addition, it poses also issues with respect to privilege and work product, that there would be these documents that would otherwise be likely protected may not be protected by way of Microsoft Recall, because you don't know whether or not these screenshots, if the underlying communications are between in-house counsel or outside counsel, but we're just now getting snapshots of what's happening during the incident response process, but we don't have the broader context to it. We may not be able to defend against discovery as to these documents, especially what is happening regarding discoverability of, incident response documents that are forensic investigations and things like that. So it produces another wrinkle that personally, I don't want clients to throw that monkey wrench in there, because I don't necessarily want someone who is doing the forensic investigation to have snapshots of their screen or anything like that. Because if it is just an email, I can defend that. But if there is a screenshot with no other contacts, it does make it harder, especially within the current landscape, given, the Capital One case.
Well, imagine, and it's crazy, Jennifer. Like, I hadn't even gone down that thought process of e-discovery yet, but it really blows up the e-discovery process, right? Not just the content, but the quantity, right, of the data as well. And to your point, right, being able to say,
makes it more expensive.
oh
for
my God,
clients
yeah,
as
it's going to
well.
be significantly more expensive because you have tons more data to go through. And not only that, to your point, Jake, like, imagine, what did you say? Every 5 minutes or 5 seconds? I can't remember what you said.
Seconds.
Every 5 seconds. So effectively, you're
Like, how do I know if you're looking at this thing because I told you to look at it, or you're looking at it because...
Well, my point is how do you exclude that screenshot from discovery, right? Like, to your point, I like Jake's comments, breach defense on hard mode, because to your point, like, you can literally see every single thing, every keystroke, every comment that was made by the person, right, that happened during a breach. And you can be like, how can you not see that this isn't obvious?
But let's talk just real quick about hey, this database is encrypted. It's encrypted with a password used on the TPM, right? As cool as that is for regular users, I want you to step back for a second and think about, this reminds me of, from an e-discovery perspective, the early days of iOS, where, Apple's like, good luck with that, right? For getting all of the iMessages. How the heck am I going to come back when I have half a dozen, just even a small population, half a dozen people that, I have to, using recall, that I have to respond to a discovery request for. At an enterprise level, by the way, for folks that don't know how a TPM works, by design, you're not able to extract keys from a TPM. That's kind of the point. And so that means I've got to go to each individual user's laptop, have them authenticate, then use some defer magic, right, digital forensics magic, to go copy this database, which is obviously locked open in exclusive mode, and copy that off. It's madness.
Yeah, I can, like, just the response side of things it would be blow crazy.
Yeah, but now go ahead and say, okay, don't worry, we'll store the keys centrally, right? Well, now we're back in a BlackBerry Enterprise server mode, or just regular. If you can ship the key to Intune or whatever, you can ship the key to the threat actor too.
And Intune's never been misused before.
No, of course not, because we've never seen that happen.
Yeah, that's never been an incident. So I do want to dig in a little bit, just for a little bit of an explanation for the concept of privilege and why that's important in a breach scenario, Jennifer, because I think that while everyone on this call has been involved in breach response and had cyber counsel and understand kind of that privy of privilege that happens during the report, I'm guessing, thankfully, most people haven't been breached yet. And most people haven't had the pleasure of going through that painful experience. So if you could just back up and kind of explain, because I understand why that's an immediate implication. It's one I didn't think of, to be completely honest. It was a really good point. But just trying to think in terms of the person listening who doesn't actually have that experience, either on the legal side or on the, I'm an IT sysadmin and I need to start having these conversations with a lawyer on the phone, and I don't truly understand why that's happening right now. I know there was an incident, but that's all that's happened. Why is privilege so important to these forensic investigation requirements? And you could kind of tie that back to, because it's obvious to me what recall does to make a problem there. But if you could tie that together, I think that'd be great for some listeners.
Of course, for background, when we say privilege, it really refers to two different aspects. One is attorney-client privilege. It is communications between the attorney and the client. Usually the client is the high-level C-suite and certain other people within the organization who are stakeholders for purposes of why the law firm was engaged, right? So one is attorney-client privilege. It covers communication, calls, emails, texts, all of that stuff. The other aspect is work product. That is covered under the work product doctrine. That covers any attorney work product that is performed, conducted, done in anticipation of litigation. So you can see why if we have an incident response matter, the communications and any work done in the incident response matter would fall under or could fall under both attorney-client privilege and work product. And right now, there is somewhat of a circuit split with respect to whether forensic investigation reports are discoverable. Personally, I believe that it is because of the underlying facts. However, there is a circuit split as to that question. And so within that context, it's very important that when we are doing incident response matters and responding to them, that the client is aware of the implications of, one, making sure that communications with the defer firm and obviously incident response counsel fall under attorney-client privilege and work product. We can defend that if there's litigation that comes up afterwards. However, we need additional context to defend that. If there are screenshots, it's harder versus emails back and forth, because emails back and forth, we have metadata and all of that. If there are just screenshots and it is Joe Schmo taking screenshots and Joe Schmo is a random IT customer service person that services internal users, it's harder to defend than if he is taking those screenshots at the instruction of counsel or at the instruction of the defer firm. And we would have that context if it is within email chains versus just screenshots of his screen, rather.
So talking a little bit about why that's, I guess, kind of standard, right? I mean, like this practice you're referring to might seem a little bit foreign for people, but this is pretty much just since the cyber solarium and since kind of the guidance has come down from government, this is just kind of the standard way that breaches are handled and processed while that investigation is happening, correct?
Correct. I think incident response work is newer, obviously, than the concept of attorney-client privilege and work product. So how this work is being done is falling into what the privilege categories are already there. So courts are struggling with it at this point, but it's important to make sure that those communications between, the incident response counsel and defer firm and the client are protected because they should be, because they are attorney-client communications and work product in anticipation of potential litigation.
And when talking about kind of that work product that comes together and how, because I'm literally now, just because these things start connecting in my brain. So you're talking about things that are happening previous to known incident and all the things that are, kind of being called by recall that could call into question that privilege. I'm picturing times where I've sat on the phone with breach counsel and having privileged group chats on Signal while we're in the middle of forensics, and that literally being screenshotted by recall and kind of it creating a real-time issue as well, not just a historic one.
Yeah, unless you're able to completely control, I guess, the frequency with which this is being done, you are putting yourself at risk of opening yourself up to that risk.
Microsoft will tell you they have some controls for recall, and you can set certain process windows to never be captured in recall, but that might create its own little situation. So I had some testing that I was doing in recall, and I was getting ready to do a little bit of publication with this prior to them recalling recall. But you can tell when somebody's been in private browsing mode, because the 100% can tell that someone's been in private browsing mode on a typical single screened PC, because the background isn't changing. Right. So it looks like all of a sudden recall just stopped collecting data. Well, it definitely didn't stop collecting data. It stopped collecting data because there was a private browsing window in the front covering up everything else on the screen. For what reason, watching whatever, who knows, right? So of course it's corporate. Nobody would ever be doing that.
Please don't do that on your corporate device, please.
Yeah, actually PSA, right? Because we don't want to have to look at it in any other. The number of incident response, just quick side note, the number of cyber incident response scenarios where I'm tracking a threat actor and all of a sudden have to trip over your stash, it's too high. Please stop. right? Anyway, so but Microsoft does have a feature there where you can say, don't ever capture this window. There's some obvious defaults, like again, private browsing, but that itself can create an issue because then you have this gap in recall collection where I don't know what you were doing, but I know what you weren't doing. And so this itself can even be valuable from an analysis standpoint. I know you're active on the machine from lots of other artifacts. I see that recall is not capturing something now.
Well,
What
so
gives?
just as a question, Jake, thinking about this from an insider threat perspective as well, let's say an organization went through, right, and configured the windows that they did not want to record, but at least again, I've not been hands-on in the application either. But from what you're saying, if there's a private window open, it's basically obstructing the entirety of the screen. And because of how recall functions, if I know that, I can pop a private window that will block all screen viewing, right? And it's not recording, or are those separate threads?
Yeah, but it's got to be in the front, right? So like the
I'm
Z
with you. I
index would
understand
have
what
to
you're saying.
be.
Yeah. As long as it's not multiple screens.
I tested with again, sadly, they've pulled it. I tested with a single screen in an Azure VM. I didn't test that scenario. That's disappointing. I can't wait to make use of this wonderful, recall laptop that I bought for one purpose, Microsoft.
To your point earlier, I was going to ask this earlier, but it's almost like I think you asked, they recalled recall, but it's not like they're not going to push it out, right? It's going to come out, right? They've invested far too much money in infrastructure, hardware, right? All of those things. It's going to come out.
It can't not come out. I mean, look, obviously I'm not the lawyer on the call, right? But I don't see how they get away without having a class action lawsuit from the tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people that bought a PC that was marketed for one purpose and then they didn't release the feature that it was marketed for. I mean, this thing right now is whatever, we won't get into a cost paperweight.
So just to kind of throw a wrench in the discussion, we've talked about risk to rolling it out to the enterprise, and this is a hard one. So I'll if everyone kind of says it's just going to be bad, don't do it. That's a fair answer. But what do we think about federal and state agencies rolling out recall
Don't do it.
as part of their enterprise? Well,
Okay, so this is the thing. So taking a little bit of a step back, currently we have patchwork of statutes that are in place with respect to privacy and data security within, the country. And then on top of that, we have federal statutes for certain more highly regulated industries, including financial services, education, healthcare, etc. That's the backdrop of what we're working with here. And I'm going with don't do it.
And I mean, look, I can only imagine if we've talked about the legal implications, the implications on privilege, the concerns on privacy protection laws that would happen to corporate entities. Those are the protections that the government is required to go through. And to your point, it's patchwork. There isn't a single one to talk about, but those are definitely in almost all cases higher, right? The government has a much higher burden of responsibility than almost any regulated industry does in terms of protecting private information. Let's forget national security information, controlled unclassified information of different types, procurement sensitive information, and even competitive and trade secrets that the government is trusted with all the time by government contractors and industry trying to create dual use technology. So there's a myriad of problems that, again, like we've talked about the problems that companies have, and it's already kind of seriously think about not doing this. But for the government, I think it's even broader. While I do think it's interesting, the new features that Microsoft is putting in place, also, I don't think it was mentioned that they're going to turn it off by default. So it's going to be an opt-in situation versus an opt-out situation. So I think that that's another inching towards safer, but not
safe. As long as they didn't put like an asterisk in the bottom left-hand corner, we reserve the right to change this decision at any point in time, and we'll also put this in super small text and not tell you when we turn it on by default.
Yeah, but hold on a second. Opt-in means that you're like Microsoft will say that you're opting into device tracking as well, right? Because there's a big screen on there with a slide box where they heavily encourage you to I don't know, man. I think saying it's opt-in versus opt-out is a little bit of a misnomer when it's coming pre-installed, and I'm sure it'll be part of the installation and startup workflow, complete with nag screens if you don't do it.
It's not like
You
they're
know,
being required
I
to put
do
a
think
full
that there is a
source.
difference between enterprise options and also consumer options. Consumers, that's a harder question to answer, but I do think that if there's enough pressure from the enterprise end, obviously it's not coming as default on the enterprise end, but I do think there's a difference between enterprise and whether or not that's coming default or you have to enable it. Hopefully you'll have to enable it on the enterprise end versus the consumer end. And the people who are going to get screwed over are the
100%.
consumers.
I was just gonna say, I do think that, like, to your point, Jake, it's going to be nag screens. It's going to be language that is not like a Philip Morris cigarette advisory that is required by law after lawsuits that says cigarettes kill you, right? Like, they're not going to have that kind of privacy notice about the impact of recall, right? It's going to be, hey, could you please turn this on, right? We'd really appreciate it. And this is best practices and optimizations, right? And uncheck this box right here if you don't want to opt in, right? And every day you're going to get a pop up. Are you sure you don't want to opt in or turn on recall? It has all these cool features, right? And most people don't read those to begin with. They're just next. Like, how do I get to my operating system as fast as I can, right? So yeah, opt-in is very much a a misnomer.
it's 2024. Windows 10 was released in 2016, and I still don't have a sane workflow for using anything other than Edge on Windows. I rest my case.
No, it's true, right? Microsoft has a lot of ways to be able to kind of talk out of both sides of their mouth, as, by the way, any OS provider can. I don't want to single out Microsoft for this ability of nagging you into setting the preferred setting that they want. The same thing with Siri being turned on a Mac. They make it very difficult. Now, to be fair, with Jamf, they've made it very easy to disable that, and you never see those nag screens. So the enterprise experience of turning off Siri is very different than the consumer experience of turning off Siri. And I guess what that just kind of makes me start thinking about is the security culture at Microsoft, and what does that imply for their customers and end users? Because the thing that really got me the most is, I know why they don't encrypt a database, and I say this as a crappy kind of hacky developer. It's really hard to do software development with an encrypted database. It makes pushes difficult, it makes testing difficult. It's a level of friction that it really exists for the dev team. And so I understand why they didn't build it that way. And by the way, adding encryption later isn't bolting on security. It's pretty common in an SDLC, in my opinion, to start with relatively open comms with your database and close that with time. But that they took this to market as a viable product without that, what does that say about the security culture in the Microsoft product management team? And the thing that I'll posit for more of a thought question is, what other features that didn't get this level of scrutiny from the security community have similarly egregious security culture in their engineering?
Specific to recall or just in general?
No, just Microsoft releases hundreds of features a quarter. And if one that had this, I mean, if anybody at Microsoft thought, oh yeah, no one's going to notice this and no one's going to poke at us about it, then they are freaking delusional. So they had to have thought it would withstand some scrutiny.
Oh, there's been internal reporting. I mean, it's not publicly reported, but there's been some internal leaks that it was intentionally hidden from security teams by the product team so that it didn't receive scrutiny.
Okay. So this is kind of like I'm not going to name the bank because we're not in the bank shaming podcast, but like the bank that created a bunch of fake accounts because the metric was to have accounts. and that obviously was hidden from regulators to hit incentives, right? And so if product releases the incentive, let's get the people out of the way that would have a problem with us hitting our milestones.
Can we transition to something that's near and dear to AJ's heart, though? And I suspect Jennifer can jump in on this too. This, to me, from where I sit, is governance and oversight and lack of corporate controls.
Yeah, I mean, and it speaks to that, right? Is just the fact that a product owner can get away with that, and something that can get like a product owner, sure. Can you imagine them be like, yeah, I hid this from security, but the fact that it gets all the way into hardware production and all, like, there's no real true.
Well, and into
Yeah.
public marketing,
Yeah.
right? It's like, you know what I mean? It wasn't like it was like quiet released with an on button, right? Like they were singing from the rooftops how great recall is going to be.
Yeah, I mean, and to the point, just the fact that something something of that level, right, should have C-suite level sign off before it goes live. And either someone was lied to, right? Like to your point, Jake, Satya stood on stage, right, and talked about it, right, at a conference live. So either he was misinformed, or what's the implication there? It was a known problem with security culture, and Satya knew about it and tried to force it forward anyway. So, like, to your point, we're shrugging because we don't actually know. Both options suck.
Well, neither, the best case scenario, he was
Correct.
ignorant and it was hidden from him, which speaks to poor corporate controls and governance. Worst case scenario, he knew and he was complicit, which is, I don't even want to start naming those implications, but either way, it's bad. What do we recommend to users as one future for recall's inevitable release, right? I think the general consensus is turn it off and don't do it. But I'm curious if we have any more nuance to that. And what advice do we give to users in general, both enterprise users and consumers, based on this lesson, based on this experience?
Personally, I think that they are throwing this as a potential solution to a gap that they have for their users. And to that end, this is overkill, one. And then two, they're trying to pigeonhole this new shiny thing into a problem that they already have and trying to help productivity. You need to figure out your actual users and your actual market versus trying to fit AI into things. And this isn't just Microsoft. This is everyone. AI isn't the solution here. AI isn't the solution here.
Oh no, please curse away. AI is not the solution here, no question.
AI is pretty and sexy and whatever, but AI isn't the solution here.
It reminds me of that NIST publication as to whether or not you should use blockchain. It was really a wonderful flowchart that was basically like, do you need rows and columns? Okay, spreadsheets. Do you need to be able to query a database? Okay, SQL. And it got to the way bottom, and it like for the only actual use case when blockchain was the thing. I do agree with you. I think that's a really good point. We need to expect people to fix problems with traditional solutions before we look to AI as the solution, because AI is still very much unknown, still very new, and the best way to make AI work for you is to give it all of your information, which is inherent problems and isn't even necessary to solve the search problem.
My first run-in with AI was Amazon's Mechanical Turk. It wasn't AI, right? There's a difference between Mechanical Turk algorithms and then actual machine learning and AI. And I think where we're at is we're not actually at AI, and it's just a new shiny thing after crypto that people are trying to get at for, VC funds. And I understand that I am being very cynical here.
I don't think you're being cynical at all. The machine that's sitting behind me here, is it's a deep learning workstation. It's obscenely expensive. It does a few things very, very well. Not 99% of the things that people think are AI. I'll never forget, one of the gentlemen that I work with, referencing AI as standing for actually Indians. Half of the things today that are being purported to be AI really are being sourced to the global South. They're claimed to be AI, but they're being sourced to somebody like through Mechanical Turk. And I get it 100%. I know you can't, again, it's a non-politically correct joke, but the highlight here being that, again, a lot of the services, and we keep seeing these fall, right? Some of the 3D modeling services last year that were all AI generated, right? Were seriously people in the global South that were being told they had a half-hour turnaround to go generate a 3D model. But it's being sold as AI, which is a whole separate FTC issue and whatnot. And
it was famous in the Amazon grab and go stores as having that exact requirement. It was sold as, AI photo generation is what's going to do it. And it was really, just to your point, outsourced to Mechanical Turks in the global South. And it was, now, to be fair to Amazon's intent, their intent was they thought they were really close. They had a market deadline and they planned on making it AI.
But they didn't do that.
Well, I think they realized that they couldn't. I think they were really close, but close only counts in horseshoes and hand grenades. It doesn't work in AI.
Their intent is great, but that's where we were at. Mechanical Turk thing was in play back in early 2010s, and The next thing, obviously, machine learning, but like algorithms weren't machine learning. And then now we're getting to AI. It's still not happening. Or for the most part, it may not be happening. You can't disguise Mechanical Turk and just people doing manual things as AI at this point.
And I would come back to your question, Matt, and just be like, when you talk about advice for consumers versus enterprise, and a lot of it comes down to, from an enterprise perspective, clearly don't turn it on, period, right, from the beginning, right? Even if it's opt-in, make sure that all your users are opted out, right? And then it is the amount of work that I think that you're going to have to do to implement this into an enterprise is in a safer fashion is pretty astronomical based off of where people sit today, right? Again, you go back and look at just some of the recommendations around securing Copilot to where it doesn't have access to inappropriate data, right? And you go and look at some of the questions that you can ask Copilot and see what kind of responses you get back. I mean, Jake kind of authored some of these documents, but it's like, if you're not asking Copilot questions that make you uncomfortable, right, then you're not asking it the right questions, right? And so when you're thinking about threat modeling and you're going through these things and saying things like, well, what is the impact if we do this with recall? You need to make sure to ask all those same kinds of questions of recall, right, in a corporate space. And then, I mean, the list is endless. To your point, Jake, once they start having things like local extraction TPM, then it comes down to what's your BCPDR, right, in the event of an issue? What are you doing in the event of mass e-discovery requests, right? And how are you going through this, right? Just the list is almost endless on the corporate side before you can get this in incorporated in a safe way, right? Because you're going to have an extensive list of do not include this in recall, right? And that's going to be departmental based, job function based, geolocation based, right? Citizenship based. There's so many layers to that that's going to come into place in the corporate space. So when we say do not turn it on, that's why we're saying that, right? Because it's not even 10% of the iceberg that's above the water. It's 1% that's above the water, and you've got 99% that you have no idea that's underneath the water. On the consumer side of things, I would tell people, number one, don't opt in. I can't see the risk reward benefit from a consumer perspective. You can't secure that device enough to opt in my opinion. Now, even like Jake said, if they have TPM, right, yes, that brings it to a physical device side of things, right? But it's a risk reward benefit, right? And it just comes down to, is your need to find documents that bad, right, on your machine that you have to have this kind of feature? And I simply don't think it is. So that's kind of my take.
I say, well, everyone, we're a little over time, so thank you both for coming. Jennifer, thanks for coming in. Really appreciate the time today, and everyone, tune in next time for This Is Fine.
Thanks.